Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 193, and we are back. I think this is my first time running this thing on the StreamYard, so hopefully everything's working properly. It's a little different than I thought it was the first time I set it up, and I guess Josh had some issues with the quality last time. So there's still a few settings, some bugs and things we're working out, but hopefully everything's working. If you guys are on YouTube in the chat, let us know so we can see you guys, and then that way we'll know that's working and everything. But yeah, so it's just Josh and I tonight. Kind of had a problem with the scheduled guest, but that's cool because we sort of got a topic that I think is on both our minds right now, and that is just approaching the finish line. We both have sort of big projects. Obviously, Josh is a lot bigger than mine. He's been working on his for years. That would be his comic book, but he's getting close. How many pages are you, Josh?
About like 3 pages from done.
3 pages from done. All right.
Nuts.
So out of how many?
Probably about, I'd say after the book's done, probably about 115 or something around there.
So yeah, definitely accomplishment. And then myself, I've been working on this thing called the Comic Maker Toolkit. So if you're familiar with the Comic Maker Starter Kit, which I guess we should just we've kind of almost skipped over. I'm not used to this, only 2 people.
I know.
I guess I figured everyone kind of knows both of us, but well, we might as well go through that anyway. So yeah,
so this Comic Maker Starter Kit that you're mentioning, how much does it cost, Scott?
It cost the incredible sum of only $0 free. So
free? You've lost your mind.
Yeah. So yeah, that's available on my website at circworks.com. If you go there, and there's right at the top, there's a thing saying start making comics, and if you join that, you'll join my mailing list, and you'll get that right away. You'll get the free Comic Maker Starter Kit. But I'm working on a bigger version, and that unfortunately that one won't be free, but it's not gonna, it's gonna be just packed with tons of value. So it's gonna be at least 3 times as big. It's got tons of cool stuff. I just finished recording a video kind of showing all the features and everything, and I'm super excited. We're getting close to launching that. So, but we'll get into that in a minute. We got to turn it over to Josh. So just in case you're watching on my channel and you're not familiar with Josh, then hey, where can they find you, Josh?
All right, so there's a couple places. One is on the YouTubes. Just search for Joshua Kemble, and when you're typing in Kemble, make sure you type in K. Because a lot of people think like Campbell, and Kemble is the spelling. So K-E-M as in monkey, B as in boy, L-E. So Josh Kemble. And then you can also go to joshuakemble.com. And that's where you can find a lot of my illustration work and comics that I've done in the past. And then if you want to kind of keep in touch with some of the stuff we're probably going to dip into today, the graphic novel I'm currently working on, that's at quarterlystories.com. And you can also very easily access that on your phone or your tablet device by going to topis.io, searching for Quarterly Stories. And then that should give you a really easily accessible comic from there. That's a lot easier to read on your Android or iOS device. So yeah.
And Samurai Ox is in the chat. He says, "Hi, friends. How's it going, Ox?"
Ox, always showing up.
Yeah. So at least now we know the chat's working, so that must mean we're live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike Emirates on the last stream I posted kind of mentioned the issues with the resolution. So let us know if that's a little better this time. We set our resolution as high as possible. So let us know. Let us know if that's still an issue. If you guys are in the chats. Yeah.
So cool. So like I said, tonight we're talking about kind of reaching that finish line and sort of, I guess, some of the almost like the fear, at least for me, and I'm sure Josh has kind of touched on this before, but the kind of fear of putting something out into the world and how that's going to be received and everything. That's something I'm really, kind of concerned with and worried about, because this toolkit thing that I'm working on. I mean, I've been working on it for a pretty long time. I put a lot of hours into it, and it's obviously the same with Josh with his comics. So there's always that thing. It's almost like sometimes you get in this, and I know a lot of artists have this kind of fear of like actually completing something or delivering it because they're so afraid to put it out there. And I mean, I'm definitely going to put it out there, but I don't really know what to expect. And I kind of worry about that too. Like, am I putting too much time into this thing for, whatever could come out of it, whether, is this thing, will it be a success? Are people going to react to it positively, or is it going to fall on deaf ears? I don't know, So that's definitely something I'm thinking about as I get closer. What about you, Josh? I mean, have you been giving any thought that, because you've talked about that before, whether, because I can look at your book and I just think this thing's like going to be just this masterpiece because of all the craft and everything that's gone into it. And it seems to me like this is a book that's kind of almost kind of tailor made to be one of those critically acclaimed books. But, hopefully that's the kind of response it's going to get. But, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a weird conclusion I came to a few years ago, quite a few years ago, before kind of really doubling down on working on this book. So I spent, close to 15 years just doing illustration, doing freelance illustration, doing work that I knew would kind of result in pay. And I wound up finding myself kind of in a similar place to when I first started, with the question of like, why did I get into this in the first place? And I tend to think like most artists kind of have a very clear idea of like what they want to do when they get into this. But it's very easy as you start going down the road and making those like first steps towards where you want to arrive. Like for me, one of those first steps was like, well, I mean, one of my first goals was just like, how do I make anything making art? Like, how do I make anything making illustration? And so like, that was like the first hurdle to kind of overcome. And what I found was that first hurdle kind of became sort of my career. Was just like, okay, well, I'm making money making art. How do I keep that going? And you're kind of, it's very easy to get lost in almost like a feedback loop of making money to kind of keep the roof over your head, and then feeling fulfillment because you're kind of getting away with it as an artist. Like you're managing to make to breadwin and make the money. But for me, I got to this point of like, part of why I left office culture and full-time culture was so that I could work on stuff that was fun and stuff that wasn't controlled by corporations and stuff that was like more author centric. And so I kind of came to this conclusion after about 15 years of doing freelance, where I caught myself in this like feedback loop that I was describing, where I was kind of working on stuff that, while it was fun, it was still kind of corporate. It was still stuff I didn't want to do. It was still kind of the stories I didn't want to tell. And just catching myself going like, well, so if money weren't an object, what would I be doing with art? And that's where I arrived at my graphic novel. So I've approached this in a different way than I've approached really anything prior, because I'm trying to just kind of make the best thing I possibly can make, without too much concern about outcome. Okay. But I have to admit, with all that being said, like it is a little scary getting close to finished with the first book, because you do have those things come up. Like you have these natural questions come up, like what next? Before what next, one of the scariest things is the question of, okay, I've invested, 5 years of my life working on this thing. Will anyone care? Like now that I've gotten to the point of achieving what I wanted to, is there any interest at all? Is there a market? And I start getting bogged down by a lot of questions like that. And it is hard to kind of continue going. And one of the things that I'm trying to do right now, since I'm so close to the finish line, is kind of like shut off a lot of those questions. Because one of the things that made me succeed when I was a young artist and I first got into this was kind of this weird, almost illogical confidence in what I was doing, that like a sincere belief that I would actually achieve what I was going to do. So I don't know if that kind of touches on what you're.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. A couple of things I want to touch on. First, when you said that, because I remember listening before I knew you, listening to BIPD, or I said that wrong, didn't I? Big Illustration Party Time. Big Illustration Party Time. But and then when I actually met you, because it was years later where we actually met, and I had one sort of this image in mind of your personality from what I knew before, and you were like totally different when I met you, which I think it's just because I don't think it was necessarily me, I guess misinterpreting. I think you've just kind of changed since then. Yeah. I think there was a lot of growth there and everything. So, but that's interesting. The other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is kind of what you're alluding to is, the whole idea of kind of just, you're basically doing this in a way for yourself. And we'll get some comments too, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, once this thing's done, regardless of what happens, once you put this thing out in the market, I mean, this is something it's a personal story. It's something you can be super proud of. And I mean, and no matter what, when you look back at this work, I mean, you're going to be proud of it. So that's something that's something to consider. And I can look back at, and mine's a little more of a commercial type thing. It's not as personal. It's almost like, for me, this is something that I want to be out in the world, and I want it to do well, because I think a lot of people can find value in this thing, especially people that are, I was going to say people starting off in comics, but this thing is like, it doesn't even matter if you're like a professional, you're going to get something out of this, this kit that I'm making. Which I'll get back to in a minute, but I want to kind of touch on some comments here. So I'm going to probably butcher your first name, but is it Gael Venezuela? I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing. I know I mispronounced that. Can you pronounce that, Josh? But anyway, oh wait, I clicked on the wrong. This is the one I meant to click on. It's really hard to make a comic popular. Which, yeah, I mean, but I think, especially like Josh's comic, I think it's very like we talked about, it's a very personal thing. So even and I guess who knows what popular, if you're talking about like popular, like Marvel or DC, I'm sure it's probably not going to reach that kind of an audience, but I just think it has the potential to, be in it, like sort of that Eisner, at least in the running or something like that. Everything I've seen and just the art and everything that goes into it is just kind of like almost like a masterwork. So, but anyway, and then Ryan from, I keep clicking on the wrong things here. Okay, Ryan from Dream Syndicate Art Dolls says, totally reminds me of the story of the fisherman and the businessman, which I wasn't really familiar. I can kind of surmise just by the title what it's about, but then he goes into what it's about. The core is that you take a long end run around doing the projects you actually want to do all these things that barely sustain you. So
yeah, and like that does touch on something that's like super important in my journey on this, which is I had like a lot of kind of successes in the sense of illustration, like and one thing I realized very quickly was like I could do a drawing in 30 minutes. Like if you guys are ever curious, just Google puppet checkup. That took me 30 minutes to execute. It took me about a week to come up with the concept, and 30 minutes to execute, and it still makes me money.
that's the kind of Kermit X-ray one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's probably one of my most successful designs, and people still buy prints. You can buy them on Society 6 right now. I'm proud of it. But and I illustrated a bunch of books. I illustrated books that were distributed by major distributors and published by major publishers. And I didn't like that. That's kind of the thing I'm getting at, is like when I started, the first thing that kind of launched my career was this kind of auto-bio comic that I did that had no chance in hell of seeing the light of day. And I just believed in it and kind of applied for the Zarek grant, which was a real long shot at the time, because a lot of the guys who had applied for it were like guys who had gone on to win Eisners and stuff like that. And it won. It actually won. And then I ended up in this kind of weird year and a half of sort of loopholing the distribution of a comic that I never thought would really see the light of day. And what's weird is I didn't make a lot of money off of that, but looking back in my career, that's one of the things I'm most proud of. And so like some books I've illustrated and stuff that had way more success, or like comics or t-shirt designs that I've done that had more audience, I didn't feel as proud of, like at the end of the day. Like I didn't feel like it was really worth the time or the effort or the money to kind of make. So that's kind of one of the things that helped me kind of hone down. And I think this will tie into what you're doing, because I think there's a sense of authorship and ownership to when you do your own thing and it succeeds. And when you do your own thing and it doesn't succeed, but you can at least go to sleep at night knowing you made something good. And this is a thing that's across the board. You know, we talk about this all the time. Like there's a lot of illustrators and designers that are far more successful than either you or I have been, that you get in long conversations with, and that's the stuff they care about, is the stuff they're actually invested in, the stuff they think is of value. And so I guess what I'm getting at is like it's almost like I had to go a long route of like it's almost like being a rock band that made a garage album that kind of sold okay, and then you go on and you make Britney Spears albums and you produce a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, the album you feel best about is that garage album. To me, that's kind of the point of this, is like I'm hoping there will be an audience. But what I'm proud of with this comic is, like, audience or not, I'll know at the end of the day this is the best thing I could make.
Yeah.
And it's completely authored by me. And that's something I don't get from my day job, which pays far better than any freelance I've ever gotten, and has some huge clients that if I mentioned, you know, most young illustrators would be like, oh, what a great client, you know? To me, I will sleep better at night knowing I made something that was fully authored in my own thing. And I think that is kind of one of the tie-ins, is like, I think that what you're creating offers value for people. It's self-authored, it's self-started, You've come up with the ideation of it at the beginning, and you've seen it all the way through to the end, and you've spent the time to make it good. So now, that's the scary part. I think we're both at is like we have these items that we know are good. Maybe they're not perfect. I don't think either of us are that cocky, but we feel confident about the worth of these things. And now it's like you have this thing that has worth that has worth. And now it's a matter of like, will the market relate that, more than the thing I spent 30 minutes on that everybody loves, That's the scary place to be. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's where the fear comes,
Yeah.
Does that further the conversation? I hope so.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was gonna go over to the chat again, but I was just curious because you had mentioned that you won the Xeric grant and everything. Have you checked out the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel at all?
No.
With Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor? Because they did a little episode on talking about the Xeric grant and everything. They didn't mention. I was hoping they'd mention you, but they didn't. but they were talking about all the amazing, artists that kind of got that grant. So I mean, you're definitely in good company.
Yeah, I mean that was a crazy grant, and one of the things I'll say, I feel like I was fortunate to be a part of that group, and I'm definitely the smallest part of that group, probably. But one of the things I feel is kind of missing in the industry right now is that sense of like kind of curation, where it's like you can kind of go for a Kickstarter and it's kind of a popularity contest now, whereas I think at the time, because it was curated by a small group of people, it was very quality controlled. So you had this very unique amount of people because it wasn't about like how many friends does this person have. It was more about like the quality of the work they made. And like I said, I feel like I kind of cheated my way through it. Somehow I got it, but I do think there was more weight to it than I feel like Kickstarter kind of provides. Although I do think Kickstarter is a good thing. Like I think Kickstarter is probably the best thing to happen for indie comics in years.
Yeah.
But I do think there's like a hole that the Xeric left that hasn't really been filled.
Yeah, because from my understanding, that's one of the reasons why they stopped, because of Kickstarter. But it as much as it is an avenue to help kind of new up and coming creators, produce their books. Yeah. It is still a little different. I mean, there's something to be said for, hey, if you have something that's popular and it sells, but there's also there is also that kind of quality control thing. So they're a little different. So it's not like one is totally taking over for the other, because you do kind of lose something there. So let's see, where kind of the chat's getting away from me. I know Ox. Let's see, what was the so yeah, he did want to know if we were getting a special guest later for flying solo tonight. Yeah, it's just me and Josh. I don't know if solo can be two people, but yeah, it's just us.
Yeah. So we are Han Solo tonight. We're lacking a Chewbacca.
Yeah, and if you notice, we keep looking back here because my dog is just like ripping apart my carpet. So,
but that is a testament to your awesomeness, because you have invested in a rad, adorable puppy.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I said if I'm going to get a puppy, I need to get her now, because I eventually do want to replace the carpet. So it's like, but I still don't want her to rip it up. But yeah. So, but anyway, so as far as kind of where my mind is at right now with this product that I'm working on, the Comic Maker Toolkit, because I'm getting super close. Like I had recently, I just joined this mastermind group, which if you're not familiar with that is, it's kind of, you get a lot of, in this case, creative professionals, entrepreneurs together, and they meet weekly, kind of somewhat similar to the 48-hour art check where you hold each other accountable. But there's, there can be critiques, worked in. Sometimes they'll bring in a guest. Today we had a guest talk about marketing and everything. So yeah, it's a really cool group, but also, so we've sort of got our, it's a 3-month long process that we're going to meet for 3 months every week. And then there's like a Facebook group and everything like that. But what, so when you go in, you set your goals, and that's one of my goals, at least for this month, is to launch this thing. So hopefully that's going to be coming out really soon.
It's exciting.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm trying to figure out what to do because when I first launch it, I'm probably going to launch it on a marketplace called Design Cuts, because they wanted to know if they could have the exclusive for it for the first week or so. So I'm just wondering how much I should promote it then, because if I promote it, because they obviously take a cut, and then also I'm just wondering if I should rely on their audience for that, because the other thing is I'll probably, when I launch it on my site, I might sell it for, a discount, and they might put a discount on it too. I don't know. So I always wonder about that when you're on somebody else's platform. Do you promote that, or do you kind of wait till it's on?
I can at least chime in with my own experience on that.
Yeah.
And if anybody in the chats has a different experience, please chime in too, because I'm just one person. But I can say that I've never been hurt by promoting another platform that's featuring my items.
Yeah.
So like,
you're talking about like a Threadless or
and not just Threadless, like even now, if like I have a client right now, I'll mention them. I just wrapped up some illustrations for them over the weekend. They're called Fadenrots, and they're like a German t-shirt client. And I feel like there's a tendency among it's kind of like there's two different mindsets. There's a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset. And I tend to think that as an illustrator or an artist, it's tempting to get into like a scarcity mindset where you'll say, oh, there's this other company and they're getting a cut, so should I promote as hard because they're going to take a chunk of cash?
Right. Well, it's not so much that. It's also the fact that if I tell them, and if they're charging a little more, and I always worry that if I send people and they buy it on one platform and they pay more, and then I offer for less, they're going to be like, oh man, I should have just waited. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I'm kind of getting though.
Okay.
Like, the idea is like I said, that does tie in a little bit to scarcity and abundance, where it's like your fan base will definitely benefit more going direct through you, but the people you already have kind of on board with going direct through you are already on board.
Right.
You're going to go direct through you. So Design Cuts has a massive audience. They're going to be able to promote you better, and not just that, it's going to expose you to more people than you could potentially reach on your own.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
And so like the thought on this is like, if you have your audience support your stuff there, it's actually going to translate to more sales, because it will then up the algorithm on that main site to have more presence to that broader audience. So that's one of the reasons, like, I've never had an issue. Like, if I had something up on Design Cuts, I would promote the thing on Design Cuts. The other thing is, like, you got to kind of trust your audience in the sense that your audience that is going to go directly to you, where you'll get a bigger cut at that point. They'll pay less. But a lot of that audience is going to want this thing when it's available,
right? Yeah,
and not have to wait it out. So
and
there's
I think
a value for value thing there too.
yeah, and I think no matter what, if you pay another $5 for it or whatever, I think the value is going to be there. I mean, I put so much into this thing,
So I'd go. I guess what I'm getting at is, if it were me, I would go full bore with that exclusive. When it's exclusive, it's like if you're a band and you're selling a song through iTunes, but you're going to have an album later, it's still good to promote the iTunes thing. Like, you want. The other thing is that encourages design cuts to continue with you, because you're bringing value to them. It's a value thing, and it's one of those like rising tide raises all ships kind of things,
Yeah, definitely.
So that's just my take on it. I don't know if anybody in the chats disagrees. They're just like, do your own thing.
So Victor Rodriguez says, so back to when we were talking about going solo, and we're talking about Han Solo. He says, does that mean that Scott is Han, Josh is Lando, and Corey is Chewbacca?
Why do I have to be Lando? Why can't I be Han?
Yeah, either way, I like all those characters.
Everybody wants to be Han, at the end of the day.
I guess Corey gets to be Chewbacca.
I guess the fact that I'm complaining about not being Han makes me not Han. So I will say Scott is easily Han.
Maybe it's because it's on my channel this week, so I'm the pilot.
Yeah, you are Han.
Channel, if it was on your channel, then you would be Han. So
100%. Yeah.
So back to kind of these online marketplaces. That's another thing I wanted to kind of talk about, because it's kind of the other thing that I'm really curious about how this thing would perform, because I've seen kind of not similar. Really, to be honest, there's not really anything else like this as far as a digital product that I've come across.
Yeah, and I agree. And like this, I know I joke about this like every week about like, oh, it's free, that's a steal, and you should go to Scott's mailing list. But without joking, you guys should do that. Like, it is free, and it's absurd that it is free. It's actually a really cool thing. I remember when Blambot first started, and they were offering like just word bubbles for free.
Yeah.
A couple of fonts for free. How absurd that was. This is not a company. This is just an individual offering more than Blambot did.
Yeah. Well, I think Blambot I'm pretty sure it's just one guy, Nate Picos, but I'm not sure if he's got a team or if it's just him, but it might just be one guy. But
yeah, it could very well be one guy. But what I'm getting at is like, there's more value in what you're offering than the first launch of Blambot. And that's not to besmirch or belittle Blambot, because it's a great company. But my point is, if you're like an early indie cartoonist and you haven't signed up for that, you guys should. And like, that'll give you a taste of like the kind of thing that Scott is building, a very epic version of that. It's I guess my point is just, there's going to be value to it. And the other thing that's cool is, because you are so in love with comics, like there's an authenticity to it that I don't think you're going to get from like other stock art.
Exactly.
I mean, You're talking authentic Kirby Crackle, like Kirby Crackle that's like, I was loving doing these like black blobs, and it's great. It's great. You guys should. What I'm getting at is like, it's something that if it doesn't succeed, I'll like, and I felt this way about a couple projects friends have worked on, but it is one of those things where if it doesn't succeed, I'll lose a little bit of faith in the taste of people. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing that I'm kind of curious about, because with these kind of online marketplaces, every once in a while, it seems like I'm hearing feedback or something, but anyway, so with these online marketplaces, the weird thing is, like, it's more geared towards like graphic designers and illustrators too, but almost it's kind of a weird, not so much people in the comic book space.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, there's a lot of products on there that are geared towards like people who want to do hand lettering. And if any of you guys if you are more into comics and you're not really too familiar with that space, with what's going on, kind of hand lettering, it's like everybody wants to be a hand letterer right now. It's just like huge right now.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of products for that. But I would probably, I'm just guessing, but I think I would be correct in saying that there are as many people who want to be comic book creators as there are that want to be hand letters. Probably, I think more.
Yeah.
But whether those people are going to places like Creative Market or Design Cuts or these online marketplaces, that I don't know. And is the market, are the people that are on there, are there enough of those people that would like to do comics? Because there's all kinds of stuff on there. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what I'm wondering about. If it's kind of the right place for what I have, you know. So I'm really, that's a lot of this is just curiosity and everything. And I'm just gonna go back right here. Salizar Art Nation says, "What's the discussion about?" So basically, if you came in a little late, what we're talking about tonight is we're talking about, both Josh and I have been working on these projects for a long time. Josh with his comic, and he's been working a lot longer than I've been working on my thing. But we're both getting really close to getting to the point where we're going to put these things out in the world. And we're kind of talking about, you know, when you get to that point where, you know, there's kind of this fear of actually putting it out there and how it's going to, you know, how it's going to either perform or how the reaction from people are going to be like. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And so Josh has kind of already talked about how, you know, even if it isn't this huge success, or if it doesn't find that audience, he still has work that he's super proud of because it's very personal to him. Again, mine is too, but for me, it's more, you know, I really, as much as I like building all these little products, and it's interesting to me, and I like creating these little digital products, I really think this is something that a lot of people are going to benefit from. So I'm hoping that, I'm just hoping that anytime I see somebody that uses something from like the starter kit or whatever in one of their comics, I mean, that's just like, to me, that's just like really cool. And I'd like to see more of that. And I'd like to know that people are getting use out of it or benefiting from it, and they're saving time, because that's what kind of these digital products are. They're just huge time savers. So if you value your time, and if you don't want to spend a long time creating all these word balloons, I mean, a lot of this stuff, if you spend enough time, you could create it, but this is just gonna make your workflow a lot faster and everything. So anyway, I'm still getting that weird feedback. Are you hearing that, Josh?
No, I'm not.
That's weird. I haven't heard anything in the chat, so I don't know where that is, but
maybe a StreamYard thing.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. And Victor kind of said he thinks it's about different platforms, and definitely we're talking about that too. As far as, so I don't know, we're talking about like platforms and have you given any thought to what you're going to do once you complete the book and how you're going to get it out there? I assume you're going to crowdfund it and everything.
Yeah, I don't know. And this is something that is really weird because I've given it a ton of thought, but I think one of the key things, like, I guess, like, I think one of the maybe disconnects when you're creating stuff that happens is it's easy to kind of disconnect it from business. And at the end of the day, like, if you're a startup, let's say you're like a startup in Silicon Valley and you come up with like a new app or like a new thing, there is an inherently risk involved in any kind of business venture. And another thing that's pretty common in business is the idea of like really like if you're not willing to take risk, you're not really going to get reward. And so I guess what I'm getting at is like, the time investment that you're putting into whatever you're working on creatively, if the time investment is a lot, the risk is higher. But at the same time, if you're planning on, and this is what I've kind of come to conclude, which is like the guys that I admire in comics put a lot of risk into what they did, and that's why I love it, because they put a lot of time into it. There's not a lot of cartoonists that I look at and I'm like floored by that just kind of knocked it out over the weekend and just kind of shat out like a really quick noodly drawing. And even the guys who like have a style that kind of looks like that, the more I've like researched, the more I've been like, okay, they invested a lot of time in it. Whether it's time in the story or the design or whatever. So what's weird is, I guess my point is like at no point should we look at people who invested a lot of time and took massive risks and go, I want to do that, but without the risk. Because at that point, you're kind of you're not going to have a likelihood of success because you're just kind of emulating. And so what I'm getting at is like, if I look at like Craig Thompson's like blankets and I'm like, wow, this is a brilliant thing. I'd like to have something like that someday. But then I just kind of ignore the part of his biography where he was like eating out of trash cans when he was making it and like doing like crap, like cleanup work for like Dark Horse while making it. Then I'm ignoring like a giant reason that book is so good. And I'm not saying you have to, I definitely don't want to be like a supporter of the idea that like an artist has to be struggling. But my point is like, I do think inherently built into what we're taking on, maybe at different degrees, is risk. And so like you were saying, what you're making, has value. And you probably know that objectively because you're not just hearing that from yourself. You're hearing that from people who've downloaded the free starter kit, from personal experience of like what you would like to see in the market, and also from other objective sources who are reconfirming like what you're doing isn't insane. So you're not just blindly going based on like showing it to your mom or somebody who like loves everything you do and goes like, that's great, Scott. I think you're basing it on enough knowledge to where it's not a blind risk, but it's still a risk. And so I guess my point is, at least for myself, I have to kind of remind myself like this is a risk I have to be willing to take. And not just that, but like with my comic, there's a lot of comic artists and graphic novels that I admire that never saw the light of day. I mean, like Mouse by Art Spiegelman. There's a book called Meta Mouse that's really inspiring, I think, for anybody entering into cartooning, where it's like every major publisher rejecting it with clear rejection letters that make it clear they hadn't even read the book. There's a couple rejection letters that even say like, well, I don't know if the market's really rife for like a cute cat and mouse book. And now if you've read Mouse, like you'll understand like there's nothing cute about that entire story. But once again, if you're like somebody reviewing it who's not bothering to read it or see what you have in your hands, it could very well come across as like, oh, this is just like some weird Sunday comic, So I guess what I'm getting at is like, like inherently, like we can't build out like the lack of, we can't kind of hedge it to where there's no fear in what we're doing, because what we're doing is a risk. But at the same time, like the potential rewards of a substantial risk like that, I think are a lot greater. And I think spiritually, I think the rewards are a lot better. So, and like the comic starter kit, like that's actually something that would be of value if people bother to look. So the big question is like, how do you make people look, and will people bother to look? You know, because I think I'm gathering from what you're saying too. It's like the fear isn't that people, if they delve into it and actually bother to look, that they'd be interested. I think that the fear is like, can you get it in front of enough people who will actually take the time to look? And then how do you go about that?
Yeah. And and that's something I kind of was talking about in this mastermind group is, you know, just basically, you know, getting this thing out there, and now I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, I forgot where I was going. But the other thing I wanted to, I'll get back. It'll come to me. But it's interesting how some of these things work, because like the other digital products that I've already launched, when I launched them, they didn't really do anything when they first got launched, but it was just over time that a person would buy it here and another person would buy it there, and it still continues to make money. I mean, it's kind of the idea behind passive income. But in the beginning, it wasn't, you know, there really weren't very many sales, but it just continues to do that. So, I mean, that's a possibility too. But yeah, I just don't, you know, I think it is kind of, it's the marketing. That's kind of what I was trying to go at, is the marketing is kind of on me. Now, whether there's enough people on some of these online digital marketplaces that are into comics, that I don't know. But if that's not the case, there's still other avenues, and I just got to kind of figure out how to reach those people. And one of the big problems I have is that usually when I create, whether it's a comic book or whatever, once I put it out there, I'm kind of on to the next thing, when I really should be still trying to concentrate on promoting those things that are out there, you know?
Yeah.
I'd rather kind of, I get so enamored with the process of creating that I forget about the things that I've already created, and that how, you know, I still should be kind of pushing those things out there and letting more people know about them. But it's kind of, you know, that's difficult. So there's a comment here by Victor. The struggle and the risk are always there. That in itself is the reward. Oh, that's not the one I was going to pull. What was the one in the chat? But it was just I think one of the things I kind of wanted to, you know, talk about, and I kind of alluded, we're kind of swerving around, but one of the things that I mentioned, and then we kind of went down a different road, was when people are there's kind of this fear of actually completing something.
Yeah.
You know, because you are kind of afraid of what's going to happen to it, what the reaction is going to be, to the point where, like, in some ways I kind of feel I have to kind of catch myself, because I'm worried that I might be doing that same thing, where as I'm getting closer, and this thing, the product is pretty much done. It's the other stuff that goes with it, like the product images like I said, I just did a video, and you know, I could ask myself, I think the video is a good idea, and I think it's going to help promote that. But is it crucial? I don't know. Could I have launched this without it? It's almost like, should I have just went the idea, and like in video games, and I know this crosses over to different industries, but there's, at least in the app space, like, because mobile games and things like that, there's this idea of the MVP, the minimum viable product, where the product doesn't have to be totally finished. It just has to be at a point where it's playable or whatever. And then because the way technology is now, you can update. So if somebody buys it and pays for it, you can update them. And I think with most of the marketplaces, you can do that as well, because like if somebody downloads something from Creative Market and I go in and make a change, I think it automatically alerts them, or you can set it to alert them that a new version of it's done. So theoretically, I could put this thing out there, and then gradually and add things to it. So sometimes I'm wondering, am I just kind of prolonging the release of this thing because I'm kind of afraid that to actually launch it, because I keep saying, oh, I need to do this, I need to add this to it, and I want this to, as much as I'm definitely in the camp of finished not perfect, there are some things that I'm just like, oh, I think it'd be a little better if I get this and this. So yeah, I find myself doing that, but I think a lot of people do that, where they're just constantly, either going back and changing things, or they're adding stuff to their to-do list or whatever to kind of make it so they're not actually putting something out into the world. Or sometimes people abandon stuff altogether. They get so far along and then they just abandon it because they're so afraid to actually put that thing out there. And that's a real thing. And I definitely have that, I'm kind of in that mindset too. So I kind of have to stop myself and that's one of the reasons why I set a deadline that I want to get this thing out. But now, at least for me, before that deadline comes up, I'm trying to get all these other little pieces and see how many other little things I can do to kind of make it a little closer to perfect. Knowing that nothing's ever perfect.
I think you're touching on a couple really important things, which is one is forever revision is a quick road. Actually, I have a better way of wording it. Perfection is the death of profit, right? So, I'm an art director full time, and one of the things you will stumble across very quickly when you're managing people is it's hard to work with a perfectionist, because at the end of the day, you have deadlines and you have clients who need product and need things on a timeline. And at the end of the day, a perfect product that's late is as good as nothing. So it's actually wasted resources, right? And that's just from a business perspective where there's deadlines and markets. But once again, even though we're creating personal projects and stuff, it doesn't change the fact that time is not an endless commodity, right? So we're investing time and effort and energy, and all of those are limited resources. In fact, no matter how much money you have, right, your time is something that's you can never buy back. It's not like, Scott, if you had $1 million today, you could be like, let me get 10 years back from my life. You can't buy that back. It's one of the most scarce commodities we have, right? So we're investing time, we're investing resources. And if we delve too much into perfectionism, we're really investing in a loss, right? Because perfectionism leads to a loop, a continual loop that can lead to nothing getting done. And so it's a real thing to be aware of. It's part of why, even working on this comic, a lot of people would think I've spent a long time on this, and I probably have spent more than most people would. But I still have a daily objective that I need to hit, because I know it's going to move that ball forward. And I'm close to finished, and the only reason I'm there is because of that daily objective. If I didn't have, right now, I'm trying to hit the mark of doing at least a panel a day. And if I didn't have that, I could see myself being trapped in a loop where I spend a year on a panel and literally never have something to show for it. And maybe at the end of my life, I'll have a perfect panel. But what was that for, right? Can you imagine if Da Vinci or one of the masters had just spent an entire lifetime on a painting? You wouldn't know their name, you wouldn't see their work, because once again they'd be over laboring. And at some point there's a cost to it too, because with art you can overwork something. We've all been there, where you take a really pretty painting and then you overdo it to the point where it's just mud. everybody's had that moment when they've experimented with art. So like, I do think there's a couple things you mentioned that really help overcome that hurdle. One is deadlines, like self-imposed deadlines. Those are, I'd say, quintessential to being able to do any, especially long-term project. If you can't kind of take a big project and back plan it, like take the end objective and like back plan and start coming up with like, well, I'll hit here first and then I'll hit here. Not only will you potentially end up in kind of a going nowhere kind of scenario, but you could also end up in a scenario where you feel like you're progressing, but you're not making progress, you know? So I think the idea of setting like a self-imposed deadline is good, just to get these things done. I think also you've touched on the idea of fear as a big factor, and that definitely is for me. And I think that's something to be really cautious of as an artist, because when you get into art is kind of a fearless endeavor. And it's kind of a face your fears sort of endeavor. And so the second you start getting controlled by fear, I would kind of question whether you're making art at that point, you know? Because things motivated by fear tend to not really lead to the best creative decisions, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. I think, you know, and obvious, you know, also, you know, being fearful of something and still going through with it and still, you know,
yes,
and not letting that fear control you. I mean, there's something to be said for that as well. So,
yeah. And also not being, you know, like that's the thing. Like, I think it's valuable to kind of be open about the fear in the process, because it's kind of inevitable. Because like tying back to what I was saying before, it's like it's part of risk. Like fear is part of risk, and so if you're taking a risk, inevitably there's fear. But then again, you know, there's a lot of people I've met throughout my life who are like, man, I wish I had, and you can just fill in the blank with whatever they wish they had done, and they let kind of fear kind of cripple them from doing that thing. So to me, I always keep that in mind too, when like, because I've had a million fears come up when getting close to finished on this. And one of the things that drives me moving forward on it is like a couple things. One is like dismantling the fear with just the basic question of what's the worst that can happen. It's a really good question to ask. Like if I want to make a great graphic novel, and I realize, like, I've done the math on it, and I realize, at least for myself as an artist, I have to invest years to do that. What's the worst byproduct if I invest the years and I make what I think is a great graphic novel? The worst case scenario is I'm a little closer to achieving that goal. Whereas the worst case scenario of like wanting to do that, but not taking any action or any movement forward on it is like, I literally end up exactly where I am, which is the worst place you can be, very far from that goal. Right. So like, similarly, like you've set out with a goal to make like this, you know, package of assets that'll be helpful for artists who are making comics. And at first it kind of started as a bit of a pipe dream where it's just an idea. And keep in mind, like at that point, you're no different than any guy on the street who's like, I've got a great idea for a movie. They should listen to my ideas. You know what I mean? And the more you do art, and Scott knows this, and I think most of the people in the chats know this, it's like, ideas are not that precious. Like ideas without action are kind of like, they don't differentiate you from the group, because the group is all full of ideas and no action.
Yeah.
So every action you make from that idea to like actualization of that idea is separating you further and further from the group. And also putting you more into risk, because the area of no risk is like the area of having ideas with no action. So I'm rambling.
No, that leads to something I wanted to talk about. Is like with this thing, like, because really, I mean, somebody else could have had the idea to do this thing I'm doing, but and somebody may, if particularly say if I put this thing out and it does become successful, a lot of what happens in this space with these digital products is whatever the big thing is, you're going to get a lot of people kind of copying that. Like there's an artist that put out this kit a while back. It was like the portrait creator, and it just basically had these like full body characters, and you can dress them up and do different things for like wedding invitations and all that kind of stuff. And that thing blew up, and then everyone was doing their own kind of portrait creator, but the thing is, so a lot of people may have the idea to do something like this for comic book creators, but are they going to spend the time to produce this thing? Because it's not an easy task. It's definitely, there's so many easier ways to make money if you're going to spend that much time on something like this. And not everyone has, because first of all, like there's a lot of people that could do this thing, but they're probably not, the people that are making these kind of digital products, a lot of them probably aren't comic book artists. And I think that's one thing I can bring to the table, is because I do have experience making comics. Because if you go on like a Creative Market right now and you just type comics, you're going to get a bunch of, there's stuff out there like word balloons and things like that, but they all look like word balloons designed by somebody who's never read a comic. Yeah. It's very, the colors are very not, it just doesn't look like somebody, if you actually read a comic and you know what that stuff's actually supposed to look like, you can tell the difference. So that's part of it. Yeah. The other thing is a lot of comic book people who create comics and know what comic assets and different things should look like, they're probably not skilled in kind of creating this type of stuff, or familiar with this whole digital, these digital products and bundles and all this kind of stuff that's out there. So hopefully that's something, and that's one of the reasons why, because I was talking about this today in the mastermind, is that, all the products that I've released, whether it's the avatar builders or whatever, I just spent a ton of time on them. And if you look at some of the stuff that's out there, it'll be, some of the products, it's just like a font, know, which I'm going to do that too. I'm going to do just comic book fonts just separately. And so I was thinking, should I have taken all that time to put together this huge, giant like toolkit, or should I have just done a piece at a time? And I don't know. I think because it is so big, I think it hopefully sets me apart from the pack and makes me kind of like, if somebody did want to kind of duplicate what I'm doing, they've got a lot of catching up to do, that type of thing. And by that time, and this is the same for any type of product, if you're spending a lot of time on something, people, and if it does become successful, people are going to come by and want to copy that. But by that time, I'll already be on to the next thing, So the idea is to kind of stay one step ahead of people, I guess. So I don't know.
No, I don't think that's all that crazy. Like when I was in the T-shirt game, there were a lot of people who like wanted to get like a comic book look with their shirts. But I think what was lacking on a lot of them was like an authentic love of like pulp and comic covers. And so inevitably, like I think in retrospect, part of why what I did okay in that field was that I came at it with like an authenticity that like a corporation couldn't fake. And I think that did differentiate them from the pack. So I think there is something to be said for that, because there would be people who would kind of do the look I was known for, but they do it like a little too clean and a little too like what corporate would think was indie comics or what corporate would think was a B movie poster. And you know, it kind of comes down to like what you admire. I think that for guys like you and I, like we're the type of people who like when you delve into like hip hop, you want to know what the influencers were. Like what was like, you know, what was the impetus that kind of started this beat? What was the thing that started this kind of offbeat rhyme style or whatever?
Yeah, like actually it's funny because you mentioned that, but like when I first got into hip hop, I wasn't really that familiar with like too much in the way of like R&B music and things like that. But you start listening to hip hop and you listen to samples and you're like, where'd that come from? And that kind of leads you down these, you know, these rabbit holes of you start to discover things like Curtis Mayfield, and you start to discover like, oh, this man, everything almost sampled throughout hip hop history is James Brown. And then you kind of dive deeper into that stuff. But yeah,
you're like you're listening to something and you're like, I love this beat, I love this thing, and then you hear the staple singers and you're like, oh, okay, that's no, I totally and I think it's similar to like rock and roll where it's like, you know, we like a lot of mainstream stuff, but when you dig back, it's like, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the band that everyone's emulating, or do you want to be that emulating band? And I think we tend to side with like the idea of like, I'd rather be kind of making something that's good regardless of like the mainstream. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't think there's anyone out there who could honestly say they don't want success with what they're doing. I mean, you should want success and you should hopefully want income from what you're doing. But what I'm getting at is like, I'd rather be the indie comic that tells a really authentic, true story that holds up, rather than the sweeping trend that people look back on and they're like, oh, I remember that year that Dane Cook was funny. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, I guess my point is, I think I'd rather be the originator where it's like you listen back and you're like, yeah, that was actually funny. Like that is really, or that thing that they're doing is really unique. I think that's where the fulfillment's at. I think the money might be a little later, but I think if you can find that sweet spot, and I think that's what we're both kind of looking for, is that sweet spot where the money and the that thing align. You know, I think then you're in the territory of like art, but like, you know, viable art. So I don't know. But I definitely get what you're saying, because like it is one of those things of like, I remember, you know, even now with t-shirt art, there are some really clear paths that might be very quick, easy money. And I have constantly fought against them. And then I do have a part of my personality that's like, why fight it? Why not just embrace it and just take the money? And I've never, I think it's part of my personality type. Like I've never been able to do it. And we've both talked about that, like the T-Fury trends of like mashups, and we've both done mashups, but it's like, there's mashups that are clever. And then there's mashups that like make absolutely no sense, but they're like, well, this Calvin and Hobbes panel is really popular, and I don't know, these are two characters from something, I'm going to make them Calvin and Hobbes, boom, money. I think there's a fine line, and I don't judge anybody who crosses on either side of the line, but for myself, I have trouble with that, where I'm like, well, the algorithm says I should do this, so I should do this. Just plug and play and make some money.
Yeah. Well, my opinion is this. It is so difficult to make a living off of your art that if there's a way to do it, you know, more power to you. You shouldn't, I mean, if you find a way to make money off your art, go for it, because I mean it's not like an easy thing. So any way you can do that, if you are making money, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. But that's kind of my opinion. So.
Yeah. No, totally. I've said this before on here, but I'll say it again. Like, if you are managing to eke out a living as a creative, congratulations to you, because you're cheating the system. It's a very hard thing to do. But yeah, like I guess my point is, like, at the end of the day, I want to sleep at night, and like that's kind of the thing. Like,
yeah.
There's a couple comics that I could have done, even offers that I got like early on in my career that I could have taken that would have been much more lucrative, but I would have had trouble with, you know.
Yeah, and you also have to, if you're the process, you also have to enjoy the process. And if it's something that you're not into or you don't really believe in, then yeah, I mean, but I guess I was thinking more towards stuff that you put out there, and it was kind of like an idea. You put it out there, and it became more successful than you kind of thought. You're kind of like, yeah, I mean, but why fight it if you put something out there like that and it makes money? It's kind of like me with the fan art thing, because I've got some T-shirt designs out there that are kind of more parodies and things like that, and they continue to sell, and I'm kind of like, well, I wish my original stuff sold more, but what can you do? So
yeah. And Squatchy in the chats was saying like that's one of the reasons why he digs tattooing. But I'd imagine it's a similar thing in tattooing, where it's like, as a tattooist, there's those tattoos you probably feel really good when you go to bed at night. And there's those tattoos like, I want this tribal pattern that's on this piece of paper that like every tattoo artist in this town does. And you're like, you got to kind of weigh your options, where it's like, oh, I need to keep a roof over my head, so here's your tattoo, but you're not necessarily going to like phone home about it with pride, or like post it to your accounts and be like, check out this awesome tribal tattoo that everyone has. So I think you got to do that. Yeah. So I can't even quote what Squatchy said there, but he agrees. But my point is like, you gotta kind of, I guess the balance we're in the juggling act we're in is like, we are doing the things that it takes to kind of keep a roof over our heads as creatives. And I don't think either of us are above, like, hell, if there's a really good paying job that's going to ask me to draw something that I think is stupid, I'll probably take it because like I got a kid to feed, But when it comes to like the things that I'm doing to advance my career, I'm more and more going on the side of like these bigger risks that are bigger time investment, but that I'll feel good about, So I guess that's what I'm getting at, Yeah. Alex Squatchy's, I charge high for that stuff. Exactly. So if you're going to do that, I like that Han quote too.
Yeah, I was wondering if there might be a tattoo shop somewhere called that. There's gotta be.
Has to, probably in Anaheim. But yeah, I mean that's exactly, Squatchy's targeting it right on, where it's like, hey, if you're doing that stuff that's soulless, you got to get paid for that.
Yeah.
And if you're doing the stuff that has soul, you got to be willing to kind of take the hit and the risk, and then hopefully it'll pay better. And I think that the scenarios where it works out are far better. I mean, a perfect example in my mind, like, one of my kids' favorite kids books, because I know we're going a little long, but is like those Mo Willems, like pigeon books.
Pigeon, yeah.
Those pigeon books would never have happened if it were just corporate. And the cool thing is the paychecks he's getting for those pigeon books would be much smaller if it was from corporate. But the beautiful thing about somebody like Mo Willems or Sendak or like those heavy hitters in art is that corporate somehow just cannot tap into that. You can't come up with that with a committee. And like you were saying about the emulation on design cuts, the emulators can't hit that thing. And that thing, like, to me, just from what I've seen of your pack, Kirby Crackle's a perfect example. I can't imagine a lot of people taking the time and investment to do such authentic Kirby Crackle in their packs to where it would even come close.
Well, this one won't have it. That's going to be a separate pack that I'm going to.
No. I'm talking about the free pack. So I'm like, doubling down on that. Like it would be hard for somebody to even mimic what you're doing with the free pack. Like the thought you're putting into the fonts. I have to use free fonts all the time, and you spend so much time like messing with the kerning and the adjustments to make it worth your while. And yet you've really thought out like the weighting of every letter. It's like, once again, people might be able to mimic, but I do think there's some value in that. So really, the onus on us, and maybe if we ever have one of these like one-on-ones again, we can kind of dip into this, which is the onus is on marketing and properly getting the word out. Because I think we're both in a similar position of like, we have some value to offer. Like, I think my comic, like I've had people reach out to me who've felt like suicidal, who've been like, your comic saved my life. And that's rare. I don't have a ton of readers, but I've actually gotten that email where somebody said, your like story is the reason I didn't off myself. So I'm like, okay, I've gotten that feedback. So I know what I'm doing is touching people and it's actually working. And that's not the goal of it, but I'm just saying, like, if I'm getting that feedback, even if that's like once a year, that seems to be pretty, like, to me, that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going is like, I've gotten enough feedback to know I'm not insane to think this thing's valuable. But then it's like more of a matter of like, how do I kind of upscale that? And like, how do I do my job? And I think we're both in a similar boat because I'm the same way. I tend to finish projects and move on to the next project. How do I kind of honor the time that I've spent by marketing properly? You know, that's going to be like the big, I think that's the big tough point, you know? And clearly I think, I don't know, you know, I think that's a struggle I definitely have where I'm like, I don't have a good pitch, you know, like that's something I have to work out. Like, I don't really know what the pitch is. How do you pitch what I'm doing?
I still think the one you use is brilliant with that, you know.
Well, thank you. But I got
hand letter, you know.
Yeah, but that's still all about craft.
Yeah, the process. But, yeah, I mean, you gotta work. You gotta find a way to work the theme into it. But I think a big part of your book is the fact that it is totally hand done from the lettering to every single thing you see. I mean, that's a big selling point too. So, you know, definitely keep that and find a way to work. But you do talk about, you know, it's a story of faith and mental illness.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to go into the characters and all that. I mean.
Yeah, but I still need a hook. I think it needs like some kind of hook that gets you into the character and invested in it. And I think you've worked out a better one for Young and the Dead because it talks about character, but it also ties in with current properties, which is good too. I need to find that.
That's what everyone in Hollywood does. It's kind of almost like it's so easy, but it works, you know. So
no, but like you need that easy work thing, and I definitely need to work on that. And similarly, like, you know the value that's in your thing. So now the onus is on you to find how do you kind of boil that down into like a very brief pitch. And that's going to be like more of, I think, the challenge because, you know, it's tough. Robert was saying marketing steps are easy to know and harder to make work sometimes. And I agree. It's one of those things where it's like, I think we know, but it's one thing to know and then it's another to execute. It's kind of like Scott and I both have done shirts and commercial art long enough to know what a good concept is. Or like, I think both of us, like Scott, you like comedy, right? You know when a joke's funny, and you can kind of understand the structure of like why it's funny, but it's a whole other world to like actually have to craft that joke and make people laugh, you know? And so, yeah, I do think, also, Salazar, can you throw that one up?
Yeah.
So it turns out there is a bunch of tattooing shops. So there you go. Like, an idea's out there, it's going to get copied. So, I don't know, but like, I do wonder if we ever get to that magic point in our career where we have no fear about something. We're just like, this is going to do awesome. No worries.
I don't know. But to just talk about fear, and we were talking about with the, creating the kit, you were talking about, some of the assets and stuff in there, or you're talking about the way the fonts are kerned and things like that. I mean, I had never, before I decided to make this kit, I had never created a font. I mean, I've created letters and I've created logos, and I know how to create letter forms and things, but I've never actually made it so you could actually type on your keyboard and it actually is a font. So I had to learn how to do that. Same thing with, I'd never made brushes before, and those are two big components of these things. So, and there's a little fear to that. Like, who am I to create a pack that has brushes and fonts? I've never done that before, but sometimes you have to just kind of get over that and say, you know what, I think I can do this. And and I think they're pretty good with them.
and that touches on one of the biggest things, which is like one of the biggest things that prevented me from doing comics. And we've both related and talked about this before, but it's like this weird notion that, someday you're going to access all the information and voila, the door's open. And that's not the case. Nobody knows how to fight before they actually fight. Like, they can train all they want, they can learn every move, but it's one thing to kind of know everything. It's another to actually be in the ring. So like, that's why fighters have bouts, because like if you've never actually experienced like the adrenaline and the rush of like that experience, you might know everything there is to know about what it is you're stepping into, but when you're confronted with it, you could freeze up. At the end of the day, the one way to like do, like, I have the same thing. Like, I do hand lettering now. I had no idea how to do hand lettering, and that held me up for years from doing hand lettering until I was finally just like, well, I don't know. I love hand lettering. Every comic I love has hand lettering. I guess I just got to try hand lettering. And what I do now is like a weird kind of amalgam of what I've figured out through that. But like, it is hard to overcome that hurdle, like you were saying, of like, I've never done this before, therefore it's not valid. But imagine if like everybody at like Disney who had their first shot at like animating a feature film and was on staff, like that first time they were promoted to where they're like, oh, I'm not doing in-betweens anymore, I'm doing keyframes. And they're like, but I've never done keyframes. Like, there's all these guys who've done keyframes. If all of those guys had just let that hold them back from actually just stepping into the role and doing it, we'd have like no animated films. Or like the early guys in animation who, imagine like if Disney were just like, I've never made a moving picture before, I'm not qualified, then you wouldn't have Disney, period, because like at some point you just kind of step in and go, I don't know, but I've shown this around, and like people who do it seem to like it. So, you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the difference, is like, if you just step in and you don't show it to anyone, I'd say probably your chances are like 100% that it's going to be a failure,
Yeah.
Because that's the scenario of like, you might be living in dream world where you think what you're doing is brilliant and like you've never shown it and it's not that great. It's easy to live in an echo chamber. But if you've shown it and people are giving you feedback that's positive, you know, you got to kind of like, once again, it's a risk, you know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I like that you mentioned that, because like I do think that's a big hang up for most people, where somebody will kind of make a really cool animation, or like, you know, a kid will get a guitar and write a really good song and be like, yeah, but like I don't know all the chords. So, you know, I don't know. Imagine a world where like the Ramones didn't release an album because they didn't know all those scales, you know. That would just be, or like, you know, where like hip hop didn't start because somebody's like, I don't know, I'm just kind of noodling with a record. I don't know what this is, you know. There's a huge portion of what we do that's experimentation. And this ties into the thing Corey always mentions, but it's like imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like,
we can go into a whole nother topic about that. But
yeah. But it's like the first time I was a manager, I felt like I was faking, because I'm like, I've never managed people. I don't know what I'm doing. You have to realize, like, anybody in a first role has no idea what they're doing. Like, and most of us are just have gotten really good at kind of figuring it out as we go, you know. And by the way, to tie this back in, the Comic Maker Starter Kit does not seem like something made by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And so like that makes me really excited about what you're about to present, which I haven't even seen most of. And
yeah.
I'm good about it.
Yeah, it's quite a bit larger, and there's all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, I'm excited about it. So, but Victor, who's probably gone now because a few minutes ago he said, "Hey guys, I'm calling a night. Have a good one, everyone." Well, we're probably going to be wrapping this up too, because we're past our one hour and a half kind of timeline. So
100%.
So I don't know, Josh. What you got? Any final thoughts you want to put in before we wrap this up?
I mean, my final thought is going to be like, it's a hard topic to delve in. It naturally gets kind of rambly because I don't think there's going to be a point where I'm not overcome with some kind of fear as it gets closer to the finish line, because there are stakes. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, if there's one thing I can say to kind of encourage anybody who's like in this process, which I think like most people in our chats are, like we are creators, we're people who are driven to make stuff. It's just the idea that like the more you do it, the easier it gets, because like the one thing that always like even now, like anything that comes up, I've done this enough times to know, well, that's just fear, you know, like to call that out, or to be able to say like, well, like when I have a lot of what ifs, I'm able to answer them with, well, 10 years ago when I did this, that wasn't that big of a hurdle. Like, you know, the things that creep up that are scary, that could be paralyzing for a new creator, aren't paralyzing because I've dealt with that paralysis and kind of overcome it. And so, you know, like Comic Maker Starter Kit, you've done one, which was a total gamble, but you've done it. And so anytime you're kind of facing fears, it's like you can kind of be presented with like, well, I hadn't designed fonts, and then I figured out how to design a font. And so what's another font, you know, on top of that? Like, so that's what I'm getting at, is like, to kind of throw out there that like, it doesn't disappear, but it becomes easier, you know, as you do it. And I think, like Robert was just saying, that's actually really good advice, which is like, I can never imagine a finish line, only small victories. That's a huge part too, is just back plan. So like what Scott's dealing with right now is like, he's doing all the little steps at the end. And then you deal with it. Like when you have a product, that's when you can freak out about it and figure out like all the extra stuff. But like until you have a product, all that stuff's kind of useless, you know? So yeah. Any last thoughts on your end, like dealing with this?
Not really. I kind of want to basically encourage people, the idea was, kind of reaching that finish line and, and everything. And there is some fear involved, but especially if you're somebody that hasn't kind of delivered on a project, and I've definitely been there before, and that was kind of my MO for a long time. And well, when I actually finished my first comic, then it was like, I mean, that was kind of the catalyst for me. It was the Mini Comics Dump Truck was the first, that first comic that I created was Young and the Dead. And then, once you get a taste for that, it's like, no, I just want more. I want to finish more things, get more things out there in the world and everything. So try not to let that fear hold you back, and just put something out there. And whether it succeeds, whether it fails, whether it's somewhere in between or whatever, just the feeling that you get when you actually have created something and put it out there. There's really nothing like it. So
and like a good example of this too is I think a lot of people work at day jobs and stuff, and it's like, have you ever met that person who's like getting into jogging and then they do their first marathon? They never place first. Maybe 1 out of a million place first. But there's this weird pride that person has by just finishing. And then what's weird is you'll notice it's usually kind of an addictive thing. So it's never one marathon. It's always like, well, I got to do another. And that's very much like what the process of art is like, it's really hard. It takes a lot of training, but the second you do it and you've kind of felt that like high of crossing the finish line, like the more you're going to want that again. And like we've been saying this whole time, it's like it makes it easier to overcome those obstacles when you're midway, because you're like, yeah, I've felt that like exhaustion before, and I finished. So, so hopefully we can keep doing it. Like that's kind of my hope, is like, I hope we can keep knocking things out, because it's a limited time we have on this earth. But if we can leave with some cool stuff that we've made, that would be awesome. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm proud of you for seeing that through. And like one of the reasons I love doing Artcasters and 48-hour art check, and even the hundreds community, is like it's a group of people who don't just talk, we actually do, which I take a lot of pride in. And those are the people to surround yourself with. So
yeah, definitely. All right, Josh, so where can they find you?
JoshuaKemble.com, quarterlystories.com. And if you haven't yet, go to tapas.io, search for Quarterly Stories there, and add it to your list. And as Scott kind of mentioned, it's a comic that I handwrite, hand letter, hand ink, and then hand to you hopefully someday in print. That day's coming sooner.
Soon.
And it's about faith and mental illness. And you should check it out. I'm pretty proud of it. So so that's it.
Yeah, I haven't. It's been a while since I've read it, but I think I'm just going to wait till it's complete. I kind of want to hold it in my hands and read it. So
that's going to happen. It's getting closer and closer.
I'm excited. Yeah. You're on my channel. You know where to find me. Again, Comic Maker Starter Kit at circworks.com. If you want to start making comics, and then once you start using that Comic Maker Starter Kit, and then you're like, wow, this is cool, I want more of this, then just keep an eye out for the Comic Maker Toolkit, which is coming soon.
Yeah.
And this thing we do, the Artcasters, we do it every week. Sometimes it's on my channel, sometimes it's on Josh's channel, sometimes the day can change, but if you want to know exactly when we're going to be going live, what day, what time, all that kind of stuff, just join the mailing list. There's a link in the description of this video. If you join the mailing list, we send out a newsletter usually about 30 minutes ahead of time, just so you know where we're going to be. You click on that, you go, and then you will never be in the dark as far as when the Artcasters are going to be on. So So yeah, and I want to thank everyone in the chat. There's a lot of stuff going on there. We didn't get to everyone, but we're trying to get to more people, and it's kind of cool that we got the StreamYard thing where we can actually pull some of your comments and put them up there for everyone to see. So
Yeah.
so that's awesome. So yeah, and I guess we'll see you next week. We got a cool guest lined up next week, so I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, we'll see everyone later.
Yes. Bye. The StreamYard lag.